What's up guys, and welcome to another YouTube. Today we're going to be looking at some of my top hip thrust variations that you might not have seen. The last one I'm going to be sharing with you is a hamstring focused hip thrust variation called the long hamstring bridge. So make sure you watch the entire video to catch that at the end, or you sneaky ones obviously fast forward to the end to see that one. It is a really cool variation and I really like it. Just before we go into that, just a quick reminder that my ultimate glutes and hamstrings training plan and guide is out now. I'll put the links below how to find it. Make sure that you go and check that out. If you're someone that's just looking for a little bit of direction but not quite ready to work with someone like myself to coach you, it will give you the direction that you need to make sure you're getting those results that you deserve with your glutes and hamstrings development. And then I also go into each exercise in detail. So it almost works a little bit like a toolbox. So come follow along, join me today as I share with you some of my top hip thrust variations that you may or may not have seen. So before we go into some of my more like big hitter type exercises, I just wanted to show you a kind of like an activation exercise. So I call it an iso hip thrust or an iso single leg hip thrust with a band pull apart. Now, you're probably going to be using this one more as like a warm-up for deadlifts, really like it for deadlifts, any kind of posterior chain type stuff. And what it's going to do, it's going to help kind of bring awareness to your glutes, get some blood in the area, get some connection with that area, whilst also performing like a pull apart as we're in that kind of supine position back on the bench. So we're killing a lot of birds with one stone really here. So we're getting those rear delts, we're getting those scapular retractors, we're warming up the entire posterior chain. So you'd use this at the start of your workouts. You can kind of use it as a finisher. It works okay, but I would more use it as like a warm up before your deadlifts, or you know, they don't mean deadlifts off the floor. They can be like RDLs and things like that as well, okay? So all you're gonna do, like a standard hip thrust off your bench. Now you can do this one leg or two. Now, if you find that it's challenging, let's say you're a beginner, you're just starting out, you might just want to do this on two legs, okay? But most of you watching this will want to do this on one leg. So think of it like an iso hold hip thrust on one leg, okay? So we're driving through our heel, squeezing our butt, holding that position there, all right? Chin tucked, rib cage down, abs are on just a little bit, and I always say cock up, okay? So that's that posterior pelvic tilt. Whilst we're holding that position, all we're gonna do are our pull-aparts, okay? So because we've also got that chin tuck, rib cage down, we've got a little bit of space clearance for our scapula to move, okay? Whereas if I'm using more like that hingy technique with that hip thrust, I've not got as much room with my scapula to move, okay? So I'm chin tucked and I'm there, okay? So that's all I'm gonna do, is maybe just hold that iso position whilst I'm doing, say, 15 to 20 reps, and then I can rest for a short period of time, reset, go on that other leg, and again, 15 to 20 reps, okay? So that's a really great option to use at the start of your workouts, and probably something that you haven't seen before. So give that one a shot. Really great to kind of warm up, get those shoulders active and feeling good, getting those glutes fired and working, and just making your body feel good before you do anything like Romania deadlifts, for example. Okay, so next up, we're gonna go into a really big hitter, introducing you to the hip thrust, to American hip thrust mechanical drop set. Now, I know for you guys, I don't need to explain how to barbell hip thrust, so we won't go through all those details. If I do, you really need to catch up and learn how to barbell hip thrust. There's videos I've done on those. I think there's even a wiki page. I think Brett Contreras started a wiki page for barbell hip thrusts. So check that one out if you don't know how to hip thrust, okay? So the hip thrust to American hip thrust mechanical drop set is basically a standard barbell hip thrust. You can also do this in a Smith machine into a American barbell hip thrust. Now, the American barbell hip thrust was popularized by Brett Contreras, and basically it's a hip thrust where you're higher up on the bench. So we're changing leverage there to make it easier to allow us to get more reps. So what we're doing is we're starting off in our standard hip thrust position. Once we're reaching close to failure, maybe 1-2 reps short failure, we're then bringing ourselves higher up on the bench to continue our set, okay? So whether you come straight up the bench or put the bar down and reset, that's up to you, all right? So let's have a look. Now, I'm actually at a gym right now where all their AirX pads, for some reason, people have ripped in half. And obviously they don't want to invest in brand new AirX balance pads. So I'm using just a rolled up mat here. All right, so standard hip thrust. As I said, I'm not going to go into all the details of this. There are entire coaching videos on this, okay? But basic point really, roll the bar on your hip, get yourself into position, and what you're doing is you're having the bench resting about kind of the level with your scapula, all right? So it's more of a comfortable position on your scapula there. So once you've completed your normal set of barbell hip thrusts, obviously key point here being, I do prefer the scoop technique. So it's kind of like a cock up motion, that posterior pelvic tilt. If you prefer that more kind of hingey technique here, I don't mind, okay? But that's your standard barbell hip thrust. Once you've completed your set of those, 1-2 rep short failure, you're gonna shift yourself up higher on the bench. Now, if the bench is quite high or you're quite short, this can be a challenge. Or if you've got a really heavy weight underneath you, it can be a challenge. But you shift yourself back here. You can also, when you get up on the bench, shift yourself back a little bit. So as you can see, that bench is further down. Now, how far down really just depends on you, all right? Just make sure it's comfortable. But obviously that will now allow you to lift a little bit more weight, okay? So it'll allow you to extend your set beyond what you would have done if you're just doing your standard barbell hip thrust. So that's a really good option. If you've been doing standard barbell hip thrusts or Smith machine hip thrusts for a while, and you want to kind of throw in an intensity technique without changing your training format too much, that's one you can use straight away. I do prefer mechanical drop sets over standard drop sets for a number of reasons. One of the main reasons, especially with a barbell hip thrust, is that if I was doing like a standard drop set, obviously I'd have to roll the bar off, take the weight off, and then go again. And by the time I go again, it's probably like 2 minutes later, and it's more like a back off set than a drop set. By the time I'm doing that, it's almost not worth it. Whereas a mechanical drop set, you're using the exact same weight that you previously did. So it's a lot more practical to do, as well as, and now I've done entire articles on this. I've got a big YouTube series out on this as well, where I've discussed the importance of using mechanical drop sets and how they can contribute to muscle growth. But because you're using a greater load, you will get a better stimulus from it. So that is the standard hip thrust to American hip thrust barbell mechanical drop set. I know it's a mouthful, but give that one a shot. Let me know how you get along. Let's go into the next hip thrust variation. Okay, next up guys, we've got the 2-1 landmine hip thrust. So the 2-1 technique basically is a way to overload the eccentric, and it works really well on these. So basically it's up with 2 limbs, so it could be 2 arms, but in this case we're doing 2 legs, and then down with 1. So you're using both legs with this exercise to raise the bar up, and then as you come down, you're only using 1. So we're overloading that eccentric because obviously we're using a greater load on the way down relative to what that single leg can carry, okay? Now, it's a landmine single leg or landmine 2-1 hip thrust. The landmine hip thrust I've spoken about plenty of times in the past. There's quite a long YouTube video actually I've done on these where I've discussed them properly. So again, like the last one, we're not going to go into kind of the full setup of things. But basically, I've got my landmine set up here. I've got my mat here because I still don't have access to a nice soft balance pad, but it works absolutely fine. I'm going to roll that bar on, and obviously when you're doing these as a working set, you're going to be lifting a lot more weight than what I'm doing here for a demo set. So don't be at me that I'm not lifting a lot of weight. Now, what we're going to do is set up almost as though we're doing our standard hip thrust off our bench. So it's kind of like level with our shoulder blades. Now, on the way up, we're going with 2. We hold for that brief second. We raise one leg off the floor, that away side from the side of the landmine, and we control down with 1. We reset with 2. We go up with 2, with nice big squeeze at the top, lift, and then control with 1. So it's 2, and 1, okay? So when we're overloading the eccentric, contrary to belief and tradition, we actually don't need to be spending a longer period of time in the eccentric. We're not trying to increase eccentric time under tension necessarily. We're just trying to show that we've got control on the eccentric. The way it becomes a potent kind of muscle building stimulus and how it's going to grow your glutes is because we're applying more load on that eccentric than what we would typically do because we're obviously limited more by that concentric lifting motion, okay? So obviously we lift with 2, we lower with 1. I tend to say about 2 to 3 seconds on the way down, but really just showing some kind of control on the way down. But if you want to increase eccentric time under tension, we can do it where it's up with 2. Sorry, I'm automatically reverting to that single leg hip thrust again, but up with 2, up, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then reset. So we can do something like a 6 or even like 10-second eccentric or something if you really wanted to overload that eccentric time under tension. There's a few reasons why you wouldn't do that, which I'll probably have to discuss at a later time point. But there you go, the 2-1 method, landmine hip thrust. Give that one a try. The setup is well worth it. Just a quick note with these, and I actually covered this in the more extensive video about this exercise in particular, also on my YouTube. You would do all your sets, or the way I like to do it is that you do all your sets on one side. So I would take maybe, let's say 90 seconds break now. I would then do my second set, 90 seconds, third set, 90 seconds. I would then take my bench around to the other side and then work the other leg. So versus your standard single leg exercises where you might do one side, then the other, then rest. With this variation, I do prefer it. Just get everything done on one side, then go around to the other side. But then the side that you do first would always be your weaker side. So the side that's lagging a little bit more. So if it's my right glute, I would start on this side. If it's my left glute, I would start on the other side. So that's how you would set this up without it being a bad pain in the ass, because we want a good pain in the ass, a bad pain in the ass by having to move the bench back and forth, just do a set on each side and then repeat again, okay? So there's that exercise. Let's jump into the next one. Hip thrust isometronics. No, I haven't made that name up. They're a combination between isometric and isotonic, and that means isometronic, okay? So someone made it up, but not me. These are actually something that I have programmed plenty of times. I love them. I've seen really great results with a lot of my, especially high-end bikini and figure athletes, because they're a really challenging intensity technique. They require you to use a lot of load, but then also you kind of get a hit of focus during that exercise as well because of the isometric component that happens during it. So it's kind of like a form of mechanical drop set, which I've mentioned before, but with kind of a slightly different level to it, all right? And that's the addition of the isometric hold. So what we're gonna do here, now you can do this with a barbell, you can do this with a glute drive machine, you can do this in the Smith machine. I really like to do them in the Smith machine. Sorry, getting my tongue tied there. In the Smith machine, it's what I prefer to do myself, and then a lot of my clients prefer the Smith machine as well. We're gonna demo it with a bar. We're gonna do 8 to 10 reps, full range of motion, normal hip thrust, and then we're gonna add a 10-second isometric hold, a pause at the top, so we squeeze our glutes as hard as we can, and then we wean out a few extra reps by doing some partials in that bottom position, which is the easier position to go into. And now I know you people that are always talking about like lengthened ranges of motion being super effective, and a glute bridge or a hip thrust doesn't really load that lengthened range. Yeah, kind of true, but you are still getting loading in that lengthened range, okay? There's still gonna be a point of failure in that lengthened range. So the priority is full range of motion, and then we're kind of like doing a mechanical drop set by going into that lengthened range just to extend the set. We're not using it as like a full stimulating kind of exercise, really, our main stimulating exercise, all right? It's just part of like that mechanical drop set, all right? So, in our position, I will not explain to you how to barbell hip thrust. You should already know how to do the basics. Roll that bar on, get yourself set. Once you've done your 10 reps, so imagine I've done my 10, okay? On my 10th, I'm gonna hold. I'm really gonna squeeze my abs as well as obviously my glutes, okay? Hold, 10 seconds, and then once I've done my 10-second hold, I'm gonna come all the way to the floor, show my butt off to the floor, and then just do some lengthened range partials at the bottom. Now, the key in that bottom position isn't simply just to be moving the bar up and down, is to try and think about initiating that hip extension, the bottom portion of the movement, by using your glutes. So it's almost like a little pulse of your glutes to come out of that bottom position. Once you've obviously reached close to failure with that full range of motion first, and then holding the isometric, doing those partials is gonna feel really hard, right? I'm not using a load here that accurately reflects what I would actually use for these. And I'm sure a lot of you would be using more weight than this anyway to do these. So that's probably one thing I should note, is that the weight that you use is dictated by your first full range of motion, 8 to 10 reps. Can do this with more reps, can do this with less reps, but the weight is dictated to by that. So use a weight where you do a normal set of 8 to 10, reach relatively close to failure, but you're kind of extending it by adding in that isometric hold for 10 seconds, and then doing those lengthened partials at the end. That's one set. You might only do 2 sets of this. I tend to program like three working sets, and then a couple of like warm-up kind of activation focused sets beforehand. So that's another variation I really do like and use a lot with my clients. You won't need to do them very, very frequently. They are quite kind of a potent exercise for you to be using. Give them a shot. Let me know how you get along. Drop something in the comments if you do give them a go, or if you have any further questions about these. We've got a couple more exercises we're going to dive into next. And remember that last exercise as well, which is a hamstring focused hip thrust variation, which I kind of came up with a few years ago and have covered. So make sure you hang around for that one. Next up, we're going to use a variation of a 2-1 hip thrust. So obviously we covered a variation earlier with the Landmine of a 2-1 hip thrust, or 2-1 method, which helps us to overload the eccentric. So that's coming up with 2 legs, lowering with 1. But in my opinion, this is a better way to do a 2-1 method, or that eccentric overload, with a barbell. And that's not to come down with 1, it's to come down with a B stance. So we maintain some stability, all right? It also allows us to lift a little bit more weight. It also, especially if we've got a bar, by having a B stance instead of single leg, I'm not as kind of shaky. I'm not having to shift that bar around. And if you try it, you'll know what I mean, all right? I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm here and I'm up with 2. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 1 foot off and then lower. Automatically, because of how that bar is shifted over in the middle. Look, if you're going to do a single leg hip thrust, that bar is going to be slightly shifted towards one side, right? But I'm not, right? I'm doing a 2-leg hip thrust on the way up. So I go 2, and then all I'm going to do is place 1 foot further out into that B stance position, okay? So it's a tiny bit of weight, maybe 20% through that heel, and then I'm lowering mostly down through that right glute. Reset and go. So reposition, control, 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 up with 2. Reset, control, 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 up with 2. Okay. You can also, if you want to, depends on the height of the bench, you can come all the way down to the floor. So I've gone to my B stance, I come all the way down to the floor, 2, reset and go. You can obviously, look, if I was programming this, I'll be honest with you, it's not one I don't think in 18 years of coaching I've probably ever programmed this variation, but I have programmed it using a glute drive because it's more stable. I've also programmed it using a Smith machine because it's more stable, okay? But there you go, it's the 2-1 barbell hip thrust, but instead of a single leg on the way down, we're actually using a B stance on the way down, and obviously that helps us overload the eccentric. So if you want a really sore butt cheek, well, both butt cheeks by the time you've worked both sides, but if you want really sore butt cheeks in the morning, then try this, because any kind of eccentric exercise is really gonna make you sore. And yeah, soreness isn't necessarily an indicator of a great workout, but if you're anything like me, you like to feel a little bit of soreness in places where you don't normally get it. So we've done most of our exercises. We've got one more coming up, which is probably my favorite, which is the long bridge, or the hamstring long bridge, which I will show you now. Now I know this YouTube is all about hip thrusts, but bridges are kind of hip thrusts, or hip thrusts are kind of bridges. So it makes sense to have this one in here, and it's also a favorite. So we've got the long hamstring bridge. Now this is a very hamstring dominant variation of hip thrust or glute bridge. What we basically get here is a co-contraction of our calves and hamstrings. So contracting your calves and having that active insufficiency in your calves, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, will increase the co-contraction of your hamstrings. I like to do this one as more of like an ISO hold, but you can do them as like a dynamic set as well. If you want the full details of these, they're in my glutes and hamstrings guide and training plan. Again, link below if you want to check that out and get all the dirty details on all of these exercises and about 100 more in there. So, long hamstring bridge. I've got my bench set up, but what I've got is my bench set up actually against a rack, so it's not moving. You can have it against a wall. Important thing is that that bench isn't going to be rolling because you're going to be pressing your toes into it. I'm down on the floor. Obviously, if you've got a balance pad, then that across your hips or just a mat. And you probably will be able to lift about the same weight on these as you would your standard hip thrust variations, but the range of motion is a lot shorter on these. So I'm going to lie myself back. I'm going to point my toes and I'm on the edge of the bench. So to raise myself up, I'm going to drive my toes down and contract my calves, and that co-contraction increases the contraction and the activation in my hamstrings. So as you'll see, it's a very, very limited range of motion to just there. Actually, I want to shuffle up just a little bit and just make sure there's a little bit of knee flexion going on. That was a little bit too straight, so just a little bit of knee flexion at the start. That's better. Okay, so I'm right here, I'm pressing against that bar to stop it from rolling up, and I'm just contracting my calves, which has that co-contraction on my hamstrings. Now, if you find your hamstrings cramp here, it's completely normal. It is a very intense exercise, and most people aren't used to the range of motion that you're loading in here. But I quite like sets of like 30-second, 40-second holds here. You can obviously have dynamic reps here. I quite like those, and I have programmed those a few times. Shalay Shoemaker, IFBB Pro Olympian. Actually, I think it was gearing up to her last Masters Olympia, this was. We were actually using these. Really, really liked them. Super back friendly, and really allow your hamstrings to pop when you want them to. Obviously not pop as in get a hamstring strain, but pop in the right way with that glute ham tie. So that's another great variation. I really like those. A little bit different, but also very, very, very effective. If people stare at you because they think you're doing something a little bit different, then ask them to try them for themselves, because I guarantee you will feel these whilst you're doing them, as well as obviously the morning after, because they are horrible in all the right ways, okay? So you've just witnessed some of my top hip thrust variations that you may or may not have seen. If you used any with your clients, if you've got any feedback, you just want to let me know what you thought of the video, drop it in the comments below. I really love to hear what your thoughts are. I reply to all of your comments. And look guys, I've really committed to trying to push my YouTube. I just want to get a lot more kind of long form content out there. And to be honest, at the moment, with two little ones, writing articles takes me too long. So I'm trying to kind of do a few more on YouTube. And I'm trying to commit to one a week at the moment. So if you want to support the channel, if you want to give me ideas about what to do in the future, drop them in the comments below. I really like to read what you guys are thinking, really. Also remember that glutes and hamstrings guide and training plan isn't going to read itself. If you're not quite ready for something like coaching, or you want to give like more tools to use with your clients or your own training, it's a really great option. It's not going to break the bank. It's super cheap. All the links are below for anything I've discussed in this video. So make sure you click on those, have a look, have a read, and yeah, any thoughts, feedback, let me know. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything in the future, and we'll chat soon.